Okay, great. Looks like we're live. So a warm welcome to everyone once again who's joining us in the live Zoom room, and also those of us who are following on our YouTube channel this evening and in the future. Welcome back to a new season of the Mind Matters series at Mind and Life Europe. We're really delighted this evening to start a new segment of our season, which has been devoted to Gaia. And I'll just say a couple of words about the Mind Matters series and about the Gaia theme, and then I'll introduce our speaker this evening, Dr. Frédérique Aït-Touati, whom we're really, really glad to have with us this evening. So as many of you know, the Mind Matters series is our flagship public talk series at Mind and Life Europe, and this is where we welcome some of the most preeminent voices in contemplative, enactive, and systemic approaches to the mind. And since 2023, we decided to take up the notion of Gaia as a figurehead for the series, unfolding it in its many guises, and that includes the scientific guise, philosophical guise, and this evening we'll be hearing more about the artistic or aesthetic guise. And we've had such wonderful past speakers as David Abram, Bruce Clark, Tyler Volk, Ferris Jaber. And this evening, it's our great pleasure and honor to welcome Dr. Frédérique Aït-Touati. And so I'd like to introduce her for those of you who don't know her and her absolutely extraordinary work. She's an historian of science and literature, a theater director, and a research fellow at the École des Hautes Études en Sciences Sociales in Paris, the EHESS. Her work explores connections between the sciences and the arts. She was awarded the 2012 MLA Prize in Comparative Literature for her book Fictions of the Cosmos, and the Prix Gagné de l'Académie des Sciences Morales et Politiques for her book called Contes de la Lune, Essai sur la fiction et les sciences modernes. And also I should mention that Frédérique was a longtime collaborator of the late Bruno Latour, and she'll be taking us through a little bit of that story this evening, specifically about their theater collaboration and the work that they've done on staging Gaia. And so her talk this evening will be called Gaia on Stage. And with that, I am happy to hand it over to you, Frédérique. And thank you from all of us once again for joining us this evening and presenting some of your work.
Thank you very much, Joanna, and thank you to the whole team for your invitation. I must say I'm very, very honored to be with you all tonight. I was very surprised to receive your email. I think it was almost 6 months ago, even more than that. And you mentioned your series, and I had already heard about it through a friend of mine, Sébastien Dutreuil. And it's absolutely wonderful to be part of this series and to participate in this collective thinking. This series, you said it, is dedicated to Gaia, and I also would like to dedicate it to the memory of my dear friend Bruno Latour, who passed away almost exactly 2 years ago in October 2022. And of course, a lot of what I will say tonight is closely related, as you will see, to the work we've been doing together, not only the two of us, but a very large team. And I think some of the people that you mentioned tonight who might be listening to us are also part of this broad team of researchers and artists who have been seized by Gaia. So indeed, what I will try to do today is just to share with you part of this story, because it is a story. It is a story of discovery. It is the story of a shock. It's a discovery also of hope, and how to equip ourselves to continue to hope, and also this amazement at discovering a new being, which is Gaia. So I have entitled my talk tonight, Gaia on Stage, but as you can see on my first slide, this title has already changed, because while I was writing it, I thought, in fact, it's not Gaia on Stage, it's more Gaia as stage, or maybe the many stages of Gaia, or maybe the many faces of Gaia. And maybe this is part of the trick, or maybe this is part of the interest of Gaia, that it's very difficult to stabilize it. Gaia is a changing, metamorphic figure. And that's one of the reasons why it's so fascinating as an aesthetic figure. And this is what I will try to discuss tonight. I would like to start with the few lines taken from the text you sent me before this conference. In this series of talks, we will take Gaia as our conceptual figurehead and examine with an appropriate degree of humility this vast topic as one would a prism, viewing it from a myriad of different angles, seeing what is reflected back and hopefully emerging with a more nuanced appreciation of the place of the human in the wider cosmos. I think this is a beautiful way to start with, because you immediately frame it as a cosmological question. And you also frame it as a humbling question. And so in a way, we are taken between those two extreme, the cosmos and the humbling question. So it's a very beautiful ambition, and I will try to participate in this collective discussion by choosing a very specific and humble, indeed, perspective, the one of art, and more specifically, the one of stage, of theatre, the very materiality of theatre. In our contemporary Theatrum Mundi, as Renaissance called the theatre of the world, Earth is not simply a shared stage, but also a major performer, acting, interacting, striving, suffering in an increasingly dramatic planetary plot. What are the implications of reimagining Earth more as protagonist than a simple platform? What are Earth's agencies, means of resistance and reverie? Many crises of our era, including related climate, social, and political catastrophes, have pushed Earth's suffering to center stage, spotlighting global tragedies of environmental and geopolitical injustice. What is the role of art in revealing and representing this eco-ethical drama? It is in this context that we have been developing some stage experiments, as we liked to name them, with Bruno Latour for 15 years until October 2022. With a series of stage experiments, we tried to understand the cosmological turmoil we are going through, and more specifically, the irruption of a new character on the world stage, this new character being Gaia. And again, I have used on purpose this metaphorical vocabulary of stage in the last 2 minutes. But what I will be interested in tonight with you is to share to what extent this is not metaphorical. This is one of the interesting points, I think, of theatre, to make us move from the metaphorical theatre to the literal theatre, and to make us use the materiality of stage as a place of experiment, as a place of approaching maybe this very special new character. We had, with Bruno Latour, the conviction of a necessary alliance between science and the arts, between knowledge and forms of expression, and of course between the terrestrial and the theatrical. That's why we have developed with my theatre company called Critical Zone, which is another one of those contemporary concepts, various performances and theatre productions. They have taken several forms, from the performance with hundreds of participants to the lecture performance with one performer on stage, very often Bruno himself as the philosopher performer. Beyond this diversity of formats, these experiments have one thing in common. They make the stage a kind of laboratory where some specific kind of knowledge is produced. And of course, this will be one of my questions tonight, open questions to discuss with you. What kind of specific knowledge does theater produce? In fact, these various projects could be read as chronological landmarks of Bruno Latour's discovery of Gaia and of the new climate regime. Just a few chronological landmarks for you now. In 2009, we wrote a first little article called De la paillasse aux planches. I don't know how to translate that, where Gaia enters the stage. On the same year, we wrote a first play about climate change called Cosmocolos, in order to share the news and the anxiety of Gaia's intrusion. In 2013, we created this first tragi-comic play called Gaia, Global Circus, which explored the passions, madness, fear, despair, and also the contradictory positions that emerge in the uncertain situation of the climatic chaos. In 2015, as you can remember, the year of the Paris Agreement, the theater of negotiation was testing a political representation extended to entities other than the human. In a way, it was a way to test the Parliament of Things that Bruno Latour had written about a few years before. In 2016, I staged Bruno himself in Inside in order to visualize the Earth and Gaia. In 2019, Moving Earth was our second conference performance, and we were trying to understand in which direction the Earth is moving and also on which planet to land. And finally, in 2021, completely in the middle, right in the middle of the pandemic, Viral, the third part of the terrestrial trilogy, explored the desire to escape the Earth by going on Mars, and of course suggested to land on Earth, on Gaia, with its intricacies of living things. So these various theatrical projects, and I won't go through all of them, of course, but I will use them as a basis of my story. These various theatrical projects have helped us to think about the link between Gaia and theater, between science, philosophy, and art. And I think as I said, these experiments are also a testimony of a succession of shocks of our understanding of Gaia, of the new climatic regime, as Bruno called it. And in fact, by sharing with you those projects tonight, I mostly hope to recall some episodes, of our collective history during the last 15 years, and maybe to help us think of the kind of story we want to write now. One interesting fact to start with for me is the fact that the terrestrial turn and the theatrical turn happened at the same moment of Bruno Latour's career in 2009. It is in that specific year, thanks to Isabelle Stengers, that he realized what Isabelle Stengers was calling the intrusion of Gaia. And it's almost the very first text in which Bruno mentions Gaia. I had a discussion recently, somebody told me, look, I have found an article well before that, where Bruno mentions Lovelock and the Gaia theory. But Gaia as a conceptual character, Gaia as a major concept, really, I think, to my knowledge, appears around 2009. And it's at the same moment when Bruno is interested in theater. And I think there is more than a coincidence here. That's the hypothesis I'd like to discuss with you tonight, or today, sorry, it's late already in France. The emergence of Gaia, of the Anthropocene event, of the new climatic regime, brings philosophy, science, and art tangentially closer to the point where they meet, where they feed off each other, where they have to work hand in hand. And as you might have understood, this is my own thesis, this need of this work hand in hand. I have structured my talk in three little parts. The first one is really Gaia on stage, how to go from the Theatrum Mundi, and I start with this image, which I like very much, 19th century typical way of putting the earth on stage, as if we could just put the globe, you know. But this is, of course, not what we have done. So the question is, how do you go from the old classical Theatrum Mundi to Gaia theatre? This is the first part. The second is really to think of theatre as a laboratory, but a very specific kind of laboratory where Gaia might appear in some way. And the third part is the one where I try to explore the idea of Gaia as an actress, as the ideal actress. And of course, in this last part, I want to talk about what we could call political agencies. But first, Gaia on stage. As we know, Gaia and political ecology are central in Bruno Latour's work from Facing Gaia onwards in 2016. But as I told you, the figure of Gaia actually emerges much earlier as a theatrical character. I quote, "Here Gaia solemnly enters the stage." This is the last sentence of a little article we wrote together after attending a performance of scientific theatre by Jean-François Perret in 2009. One of the first appearances of Gaia in Latour's text is a theatrical one. I think this is quite telling. This paradoxical character has been through many metamorphoses afterwards. But first, I would like to ask, why is it a character? Which is another way to say, why did Latour was so interested in Gaia as a concept, whereas so many people told him, look, Bruno, you should stop using Gaia. It doesn't help politically, scientifically. It's a controversial concept, but he still wanted to stick on it. One of my hypotheses, and I would be happy to discuss it with you, is that precisely because Gaia is a character, it's one of the reasons why really Bruno Latour wanted to keep it as an extremely fruitful conceptual character. Not only conceptual, of course, as a character, very mysterious character, an entity. But of course, it's a challenge of representation. And when I say representation, I have in mind both my history of science and philosophy of science corpus of what representation means in our field, but also I have in mind what representation means as a theater director. Representation is this kind of difficult, interesting concept that goes from philosophy to theater. And it's very useful for us to use. Because of course, ecological issues and natural phenomena with their multiplicity, magnitude, ubiquity, duration, they present challenges to current knowledge and representation. It seems that the complexity of the entangled phenomena which we experience in the contemporary ecological crisis is impossible to represent. And one way of showing that is this little image of Bruno on stage, which I like, where he shows the earth, the soil, and says, well, we don't have a representation for that. This is where we should go, with the two fingers pointing on the floor. But, and this is tragedy, there is no political, no scientific, no artistic representation of of this terrestrial, of this Gaia thing. And this has been, in many ways, the drive, I would say, and the starting motivation of our work together and with a much larger team, as I said. Gaia is difficult to see, is difficult to situate, is difficult to represent, is difficult to approach. That's the reason why arts have a special role to play in this context of uncertainty, and I would say in this context of blurriness, if the word exists in English. So the great problem of the Gaia hypothesis for us was to create a stage that can make Gaia appear, that can make her visible, that could make her capacity to act perceptible, in other way, that could make her agency visible. But we don't have visualization devices for such an entity. In the term of Latour epistemology, or philosophy of science, I should say, we don't have a laboratory for Gaia. As you know, Bruno used the word laboratory in a very specific sense of a place which makes entities visible, such as the Petri dish in the case of Pasteur. But we don't know how to isolate Gaia. We can't make it proliferate in a Petri dish so that we can observe it, because this agent is on an entirely different scale from a microbe, and also because it is intricately linked to our own world and our own existence. Above all, this agent is dispersed everywhere in the same space we inhabit, without occupying a specific location. We could say, and I don't know if you will agree with this phrasing, that it's an agent without an environment, because it is its own environment. So, rather than making invisible agents visible, this was Pasteur's problem. Lovelock and Margulis' problem, as you know, the creators of the Gaia hypothesis, Lovelock and Margulis' problem is to make visible in a different way what is our most common shared experience, the existence of life on Earth. In a way, we could say this is much more difficult, because the aim is not to bring to light an unknown agent, a microbe, but to transform our understanding, our very definition of an apparently well-known agent, the Earth, and its living creatures. So do you see, that's, one could say, this is the philosophical problem, but it's also completely, deeply aesthetic problem at the same time. My collaboration with Bruno Latour began when we tried to move this theater of proof, which is another way to call the laboratory in Latour's philosophy, the théâtre de la preuve, from scientific spaces to actual theaters. When we moved from the theatrical metaphor that I mentioned at the beginning to the stage itself. And my hypothesis is that Gaia's appearance, Gaia's intrusion, like Isabelle Stenger says, make us move from metaphorical theater to the theater in the literal sense of the term, from the theater of proof to the proof of theater. Because then theater became one of the places where we tried with our team to understand and visualize Gaia. Why? Well, because theater becomes a place where you can test hypotheses. It becomes a kind of laboratory, as I said, in the sense of a place of visualization, testing, and reversing forces. What we've done then is to test a series of images. So you see, this is the same image with this blurred image. This is one of the very early representations of Gaia. I think it might make some people smile or laugh. It's on purpose a very naive vision. It's just a way to say, okay, we can't just put a globe, we can't just put Earth. Let's try different approaches, different images, different intuitions. We were, of course, inspired. Sorry, I'm just trying to move. For some reason, this image is, yeah, let me use this little bar. We were, of course, inspired by all the scientific images of the Anthropocene, but also the Anthropocene square meter, and also all the beautiful attempts of Anat Singh that already link art and science. But in a way, we felt that it was not enough to feel this Gaia entity. So we tried in a very naive way with Gaia Global Circus to make a kind of huge canopy that would fly on the stage. That was a long time ago in 2013, in one of our first attempts. And then we tried another series of attempts. This is in Inside. And again, you have a kind of game with different images that were created by Alexandra Arène and Axel Grégoire, two architects. And we were trying to make a moving Gaia made of lots of entities. And again, this is on purpose a kind of series of attempts. What can we make of all these images, which have apparently nothing in common? I think we can make two remarks. First, landing on Earth, searching for Gaia, is a kind of bricolage in the Deleuzian sense of the word. It means, at least for us, it meant using all the possible tools and combining them. It requires a series of trial and error, and also a great deal of indisciplinarity or interdisciplinarity, like asking architects, designers, but also sound creators, because of course sound was very important in these endeavors. Two, it was also a way to insist on our situation of uncertainty. And that was the key point. It's not only about experimenting with strange, blurred images. It's also a way to say, look, we are all plunged into a situation which we don't control. There is an equal stage of uncertainty in science, in politics, in arts, in philosophy. And this is really a key point for me, for us, that I would like to underline. All the things we've been doing with Bruno was never such thing as putting on stage a fixed thesis, a finished idea, a set of knowledge. Absolutely not. Precisely the contrary. To go on stage meant for us to share our uncertainty and to make visible this common collective dazzlement in a way. And it was very important for me in the way I was staging Bruno to make sure that he never appeared as, you know, the philosopher en chair, like this top-down discourse. It was the contrary. It was really somebody in research, at work. So the ecological crisis, to go back to my text, implies new ways of describing and conceiving space. The Earth system sciences teach us that nature, as we used to call it, cannot be contemplating as a setting or as a landscape, that it is a constant interplay of actions and reactions that produce life and its conditions of possibility. There is no longer a spectacle of nature that you could stage, that you could stare at, that you could admire from a safe point of view. But on the contrary, there is a space that is inhabited, that is made, created by the very beings who inhabit it. This is the beauty of the Gaia hypothesis, isn't it? So nature in that context is no longer a stage, a fixed decor. And again, this is why it is such a challenge for me as a theater director. Why is it not a decor anymore? Because we have discovered the multiple actors who fabricate it with us, within us, and beside us. The living beings make and transform the world they inhabit in a continuous and multiple performance. So you see, I started with the Theatrum Mundi, with this old vision of the world as a theater. But the old Theatrum Mundi, the theater of the world, has not disappeared in this Gaian world, but it has a completely different form, a completely different aesthetics and face. And maybe it looks more like that. This photo, we called it the Scream of Gaia, and it's a photograph on an ice pack that Bruno had taken on a plane trip to join the company crew during one of our first tours in Calgary, Canada, where we were performing Gaia Global Circus. We decided to use this photo taken, as I said, just with a telephone by Bruno, as the starting point of the next performance inside. Opening the show with this image was a way for us to immediately plunge the audience into the question of the contradictory affects, emotions that seize us in the face of the catastrophe. Because of course, you have recognized maybe the scream of Gaia, the scream of Munch. At least it was striking for us. It was very reminiscent of this famous Munch painting. Inside this first performance is the story of a conversion of the gaze from the point of view of God, or the point of view of Sirius, as we call it sometimes, you know, this faraway point of view on the globe, on the planet Earth, to a new point of view in the Earth, in Gaia, inside, hence the title. From the distant gaze to the gaze immersed among other living beings. From the classic images of the Earth to new disconcerting images. This is the starting point. And I won't remake Bruno's demonstration, but this is how inside goes as a performance, starting from those beautiful images of the Earth seen from afar, but which don't really give us a feeling of what Gaia is. And this is the paradox, the starting point of the whole terrestrial trilogy. So can we change the way we see the Earth, our way of walking on Earth? Because Earth is typically pictured as the blue marble floating in outer space. Our work inverts this detached view of the planet. Instead of an autonomous object of, or I would say, instead of a theatrical backdrop, we engage Earth as a living entity, interactively enveloping us. Sorry, I think my translation here is very awkward. I hope you're following me. Inside proposes to stand not on the globe, but in Gaia, in the critical zone. And maybe we will discuss as well the difference between the two words that we used in different contexts. In so doing, and again, I'm very interested, as you can see, in the making of our Gaian equipment, so to speak, how to equip ourselves to feel this new entity. we worked with two young, great architects, Alexandra Arène and Axel Grégoire, and an artist, Sonia Levy, to imagine with them the condition of standing not on Earth, but within it, within this inhabitable region extending a few kilometers up and down from the Earth's skin. And I remember talking a few years ago with Bruce Clark about this biofilm that he helped us as well to name. This collaboration with colleagues who were also trying to characterize this biofilm, this Gaia, expanded to a set of what we called speculative living maps, which would later inspire our book Terra Forma. I mentioned that because for me, it's quite telling to see that a performance that we created in 2016 called Inside made 3 years later this book in a way, which is an expansion of the question asked by Bruno on stage. How would you represent this critical zone? How do you make visible the fact that space is not a content, but is actually made by the living things? So I just go through a few of those images that we use in Terra Forma. And of course, it's interesting because now those maps are integrated in Inside when we perform it, because we do perform it still with an actor. So there is a nice interplay, I think, between, let's say, graphic design, graphic research, philosophical research, scientific research, and theatrical research. All that go really hand in hand. Because the living soil maps, so to speak, we created for Inside and then for Terra Forma are a way to interpret Gaia's rifts, breaches, flux, strata. My second point, and they will be much shorter, the second and the third, is just a way to continue that the story. Once we had done Inside, we continued with Moving Earth and with Viral, as I told you. And I just wanted to mention how speculative and experimental those performances were for Bruno Latour. There were not written texts in advance to be performed. They were always improvised lectures. Of course, they were following a specific dramaturgy that we had discussed before in relation to the set design, in relation to the images. But the fact that there was no such thing as a fixed text was really important for us. It meant that each representation, each new date in a new place where we were invited in NYU, New York, in Berliner Festspiele in Berlin, in London, in Marseille. Each time it was a new play. Because of course, the thinking had changed because Bruno had added into that the last article he had read the day before, as he liked to do, or maybe news, or maybe a new thought. So that the audience does not attend a finished demonstration, but rather the emergence of a thought that develops in front of them. This is why I like to call this work with Bruno for 15 years a theater of thought. Not really a theater of ideas, because again, that would mean that ideas are fixed. A theater of thought. I wanted to capture the very special moment of thinking in a scenic form. The aim is not to illustrate a thought or a theory, but to show the theatricality of a thought in progress, and to suggest that theater is a relevant tool for speculation. So in fact, each performance became a kind of thought experiment in the space and time of the performance. In what way, you might ask, is that related to Gaia? Well, I think it's very deeply related. It's because Gaia is such a moving, living entity that the kind of aesthetic forms that we need to approach it or her has to be also very metamorphic, moving in a way, if you follow me. And that's precisely the title of the second performance, called Moving Earth, in the plural, that we created in 2019. This second part of the terrestrial trilogy stages this specific agency of Gaia. We tried to embrace the Gaia and to explain and to tell the story of the discovery of the Gaia hypothesis by James Lovelock and Leon Margulis. And maybe this is the most relevant part of the trilogy for this series. And I just want to mention that you can find this by Bruno himself on my website, if you want to see Bruno explaining the story of the discovery of Gaia in this Moving Earth performance. The idea was very beautiful. I think it was to make the parallel between the discovery of the new cosmology in the 17th century by Kepler, Galileo, and the others, and to confront that discovery with our discovery of Gaia today. Now, said Bruno, we must accept an even more startling fact that the Earth is moved. And what I like a lot with this little play is that it says not only that there is a parallel to be drawn between the shock of the moving Earth in the 17th century and the shock of the moving Earth today, but that in fact our shock is much bigger. And this is it. This is not Bruno himself, this is Duncan Evenou performing, because Bruno was already ill at that time, in the Théâtre de l'Odéon in Paris, this performance. But here, this is an image that I like very much, of that you might have seen in some of the books of Bruno's last exhibition catalogue. It's an image of Bruno performing Moving Us in the Théâtre des Amandiers in 2019, and he looks at Lynn Margulis when she explains the Gaia theory. And this one I like as well, because this is Margulis' hands showing us the very making of, I try to make it bigger for you to see this beautiful, it's Margulis in one of the videos that I think Bruce gave us, and the people who have Margulis documents, when she explains that Gaia at the beginning, what was that very, very thin layer of living things. And of course, this is immensely theatrical. And I quite like this image of this typical Paris theater, Théâtre de l'Odéon, being taken by this beautiful scientific image. And I also show you this one, because this is, again, Bruno Latour at Les Amandiers this time, using this 19th century Humboldtian kind of drawing to say that the very thin layer of Gaia was already an intuition at the time of Humboldt. Right, that was a few images. I will try to go to the last part now. And to see whether we could say finally that Gaia is the actrice par excellence, so to speak. Of course, the term Gaia, proposed by the English scientist James Lovelock, is indeed ideal to sum up the whole set of instruments, intuitions, models, hypotheses on what it means to live on Earth. What fascinated us, I think, and the reason why we've been doing so many theatrical experiments around Gaia really is that Gaia is so difficult to seize because it's a hybrid character, so multiple, that in a way she's recalcitrant to the usual forms of visualization. And I would like to argue, finally, that this is precisely what makes her such a formidable theater character. And again, I have no idea whether you should say it or her in English. And sorry for the confusion or troubling English if this is the case. We don't know exactly what this new being is. We observe Gaia through her performances, and again, such an interesting semiotic theatrical term, performances, before determining her skills. We look at how she acts, we look at what she does. Gaia is ticklish, says Isabelle Stengers. Bruno often quoted this phrase, this sentence from Isabelle. Gaia is chatouilleuse. She reacts to our actions. She intrudes. She enters the human and political stage. Gaia acts, intervenes, conspires, but she's untraceable. She does not coincide with any substance of the universe, neither with the totality of the planet, nor with one of its portions, the critical zone, nor with the astronomical relations she maintains with the sun. Gaia's atopic nature, no place kind of nature, is what makes her the actrice, the actor par excellence. For she can embody herself in any face and let herself be carried by any being. She is constructed by the multiple and contradictory actions of living beings. Gaia is an actress. She is the one who plays each of our lives, and conversely, the character each of us strives to play. As Latour puts it in the Moving Earth, at the end of Moving Earth, I quote, Gaia controls itself. It maintains oxygen over millions of years. It is something that is a regulation, a self-regulation. There is a multiple being, an enigmatic being, a being that maintains itself in existence over millions of years and maintains the conditions that allow you here to breathe, unquote. I like this quote because it doesn't answer the problem. I just want to finish with a few images of Viral, which was a final attempt during the pandemic to merge the virus and our own bodies, and to see to what extent we could explore the idea of holobiont, and to what extent we could indeed merge into this space full of other beings. But I just go through those quickly. And this is the reason why I wanted to finish with those images is because they are quite political. Already in the theater of negotiation that we created with Bruno and Philippe Ken at the Théâtre des Amandiers in 2015, just 6 months before the Paris Agreement. Already at that time, the Earth was presented as a heterogeneous political actor. This experiment, again, thought experiment, theater performance, was staged with 200 international students the negotiations, which were fictional negotiations, of course, as you have understood, gave voice not only to delegates of various regions, like forests, I mean, not only to various regions and of course nation states, but also to marginalized groups, youth, climate refugees, and of course other agents like forests, rivers, endangered species, atmosphere, oceans. I think it's interesting because now it might sound quite banal to do this kind of extended political parliament, but I think almost 10 years ago, it was a bit of a shock for everybody, and especially for the students who made this theatrical performance with us. During the week-long performance, agencies proliferated, architecture, and also the audience, and the whole theater became a place of really, I would say, a parliament of things. So I just wanted to finish with those memories of that. And of course, this is very much linked to, this is the beginning of moving us, another way to move people. A few words to conclude. Blurring borders between social and natural sciences and describing the networks connecting persons and things was the life work of Bruno Latour. Theater has become, for him and maybe for our transdisciplinary team, one of the heuristic tools to discover, to question, to test the transformation in the conception of our shared terrestrial space. I just want to mention, to finish with, that Inside, Moving Us, and Viral anticipate or extend some of the reflections developed in Down to Earth, and also in Où suis-je, which I think is translated by Metamorphosis in English. So there was really a constant dialogue, as I mentioned, between philosophical writing and stage experimentation. Each of these stage experiments were conceived as a way of exploring the sensitive, concrete, material, and emotional consequences of the discovery of this new being, making us sensitive to the upheaval in progress, exploring our contradictory passions, questioning our position on Gaia, making us see differently the territories we inhabit. These are some of the experiences that the stage has allowed us to attempt. And finally, what I find interesting maybe to remind is that in those experiments, theater and theory, spectacle and speculative work, monstration and demonstration, these are the links, both historical and etymological, that the present situation compels us to renew. Our theatrical experiments aimed to create conditions for embodied thought experiment, where different actors, agents, entities, and actions come into play in tension, making available to the senses the idea that Gaia is not separate from humanity and humanity not separate from Gaia. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Frédérique. I think if we could, we would all be giving you a round of applause, quite literally. But on Zoom, we do it in our quiet way, I guess. Really, what a wonderfully visionary and rhapsodic and scientific and poetic presentation, and so full of riches. Thank you so much, and thank you for your incredibly generous offering and showing us so many of the images and the sort of step-by-step process of these different creations, it really gave us a window onto this whole world of creation, really. So I'm sure we have questions and some thoughts from folks in the audience. So we're happy to open up the floor now. So if you'd like to ask a question or offer a thought or discuss, just please raise your hand, your virtual hand, so we can see you at the front of the Zoom room. And maybe if you can stop sharing your screen, we can then see the hands, and then you can unmute yourself. So I see Ruben, you've already raised your hand.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for this wonderful talk. Just one question about, I was wondering, are there any historical precedents for this way of approaching theater, like in the history of theater and philosophy? Could you think of similar attempts to do this kind of?
Yeah, it's a beautiful question. I asked myself the question, and I spent 10 years trying to answer it by writing a book called Theater of the World, which is exactly on your question. And you see, it took me 10 years, and I'm not sure I can answer. But I was interested in the capacities of theater to make us think more generally. And I wouldn't say that theater has been used exactly as we did historically, but I can affirmer that theater has been used to think in many different ways. And the little I won't, again, it would take me 10 years, but the little chronology I can draw for you quickly is just to realize that, for instance, when you take the Elizabethan theater, the Globe theater, it's a way to think about the cosmos already, because the Globe, as Francis Yates, the wonderful Francis Yates, told us, is that it was built on the model of Vitruve, the architect Vitruvius. So we do have a model of the cosmos in the architecture of the theater itself. And then what I tried to do with my little book is to show that the Cartesian dualism, you can find it in the division of stage and audience in the 17th century, very, very clearly. So I can't find any exact example of the use of stage as a way to think exactly as we did with Bruno. However, I can find lots of examples of the fact that theater thinks in all the senses of the word. Theater as a place, as a building, as a practice, as a collective space, as an architecture. And in fact, I like to use the word that John Tresh took from anthropology when he speaks of cosmograms. I like to think of theater as a cosmogram, as a way to think the cosmos, as a way to draw, to represent the cosmos. And when you broaden up the question of theater to cosmogram, then I find that quite exciting intellectually and aesthetically. It means that we need new cosmograms. We need to build not only architectures, but maybe way of assembling, which help us to feel and understand Gaia, if you follow me.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ruben. Yeah, Bruno.
Hey there.
Hello.
Hi, Frédérique.
Hi, Bruno.
So great
nice
to see you. And thanks for that really wonderful compendium of over a decade of work that you were doing with Bruno. And I was thrilled to have you bring up those images from the clips of Lynn Margulis that I was able to send your way. You know, when she's pulling the she's taking a piece of sand from a marsh or something, but what she's showing is the cyanobacteria, and so she's pulling very delicately so that the strings won't snap but so that she can show them, make them visible as these primal agents of at the foundation of Gaia. It says this is the tissue of Gaia, is what she's saying as she's pulling those strings apart. I wanted to ask you about, and in a way, my sort of comment question is teed up by the language issue, as between French with its gendered, with its linguistic genders, and I guess Gaia is feminine in French. Whereas in English, that problem doesn't arise, but the problem that Lovelock and Margulis had, and the reason why Bruno's colleagues would say, don't stay away from Gaia because it's too problematic or whatever. In that history, I mean, it had to do with the tendency, the problem that Lovelock created, and then kind of turned into a positive, sort of in the fullness of the unfolding of Gaia, the problem of the mythological name, the name of Gaia, right? What was what gave the scientists back at that time, gave them the heebie-jeebies, right? Because so the problem always was the propensity for personification, that Gaia, and that seemed to open up this sort of return to a mythological figure, right? The goddess of the earth, Gaia, goddess of the earth. And then you've got this whole layer of mythic connotation. And then many of the early sort of proponents of Gaia were happy. It's kind of the New Age reception, just to give it a shorthand label, was one that wanted that reanimation. Wanted that return to a sense of the divinity of the earth. But of course, the science was, something else entirely. And so it struck me that what you've managed to do is kind of finesse that issue quite entirely. Gaia is a character. So when you finished up by talking about Gaia as an actress, well, that's a kind of, well, you're doing theater, the character. So you're calling Gaia a character, and yet, as you showed us, you were sensitive from the very beginning to the very difficulty of defining this character that's actually a profusion, a multiplicity, so there's, and so there, that's the tension that I have been exploring in my approaches to this topic, right? Between kind of the tendency to, between the singularity or the holistic totality. Again, Bruno, Gaia is not a god of totality, and he was constantly trying to break down that sort of backslide into a holistic sense versus the, I think the more proper systemic recognition that you've got systems within systems within systems, systems beside systems beside systems, and it's that interplay that needs to be appreciated to get what Gaia is about. So I'd just be curious about your thoughts on that particular problematic and the way you played with that and resolved it, I think, very, very beautifully.
Well, it's so nice to start again this conversation with you, Bruno, that we started years ago when you came to Paris, I remember, and then when you were so much involved in the making of the exhibition in Karlsruhe with all the documents that you sent about Margulis. So yeah, thank you for all of that. It has been, I just wanted to mention that it has been a kind of a transatlantic conversation over the years, and it's beautiful that it continues now. But in a way, you said it all, because you're right. There's a tension, and what I find so interesting with theater is that we don't need to solve the tension immediately, because theater is quite well equipped, after all, to cope with strange kinds of characters. You know, Greek theaters was full of gods, and Elizabethan theater was full of dead people and things which are not really people, forces, cosmic forces, entities. So this tension, I would say, is the very nature of theater. And maybe it's one of the little few expertise that theater still has compared to other medium. Because of course one could ask, why did Bruno Latour spend 15 years doing theater? He could have done a Hollywood film, you know. He did loads of exhibitions, books. He could have made an opera if he wanted. And he was very much interested in music, by the way. But still, it was theater. And I think part of the answer of your remark and question lies in the capacity of theater to embrace and welcome these strange kind of characters which are characters, but which are not defined in the same way as an individual, a human being, a thing. And you said it very well. We played with the tension. I'm not so sure that we completely solved it, as you said very generously, but it was a constant drive of our research. And the very reason why we've been doing so many different formats, because if we had solved it from the beginning, from the first attempt in 2009, we would have stopped. We said, okay, we have staged Gaia, that's done. But no, it was always a failure in a way, or always an attempt in the 17th century sense of the word, which I like, you know. Really, it's an experiment, it's an attempt, and it's something which is very close from the very scientific process in a way. And of course, I think we were very inspired, as you said very well, by the mythological import, envergure, I would say, of Gaia, the fact that it was also a very impressive character. And we were always very impressed by Margulis saying Gaia is a bitch, you know, and always you have this tension between the honorable mythological character and this kind of
not a mere bitch, but a tough bitch.
A tough bitch. You're right. That's the exact quotation. Yes.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bruno. Yes, Tyler.
Hi, it was really interesting, and also just the conversation you had with Bruno, the two of you, was also very interesting. So thank you. Your use of the term experiment. So I'm a scientist, and experiments are often run sequentially as one gets results in and changes the nature of the experiment. And so I assume that this was happening with you too, with these experiments. And I was wondering if you could comment on your use of the word experiment here. In a sense, all theater, as it's going through various permutations, could be thought of as the writers and directors and actors is doing experiments on what is working and what's not working. So I wonder if you could give an overview on what you think developed as a result of the experiments in this sequence, and what you were looking for. Are you looking for were you looking for audience reaction of some kind, obviously, but getting people motivated in a certain direction, or just could you talk about that a bit? Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, and I'm very honored to meet you after having read you so much as well. I must say that I'm not a scientist. I'm a historian of science, and when I use the word experiment, I use it a bit like Robert Hooke or Bacon would have used it in the Royal Society. I'm a student of Simon Schaffer, and I was really interested, in this old classical difference between experience and experiment in English. Again, this is something we don't have in French. So experiment in my mouth doesn't have exactly maybe the sense it has for contemporary scientists. It's a bit looser, but it is still you're right, a scientific metaphor, at least. And we played a lot with this idea with Bruno, and this was actually the very basis of this little article we wrote about the link between the laboratory and the stage, which is from the laboratory to the stage, de la paillasse aux planches. Paillasse, this French word to say the place where chemical table is made. So we played with the idea that we could actually use the stage as a laboratory, hence the idea of experiment. Now I can answer you that you have the context. I would say that because we've been doing those experiments throughout 15 years, of course, the hypothesis and the result changed each time. So I have written a little text that I can send you that explains exactly what are each experiment, each hypothesis and the result, but I can summarize it just now by giving you 2 or 3 examples. I think the very first experiments, so to speak, were about passions, strangely enough. I remember very well when Bruno told me, look, there is something terrible happening. And it was really this realization of the catastrophe in front of us, this intrusion of Gaia, like something arriving. And he wanted, as you said, to share this passion, to share this anxiety. So that was a very basic result in a way. And it was a complete failure, this one, because we realized that alerting the people that, oh my God, scientists tell us that what we are facing is terrible, which was in 2009. It was the failure of the Copenhagen COP. It was absolutely not working. So we stopped this kind of idea of theater as a way to warn, to warn people. And then we started things which for me were more interesting because I think the hypotheses were a bit different. The hypothesis of the theater of negotiation was that we could, as I said, expand the political representation to other living things than humans. So it was a political experiment. The hypothesis of inside was that the globe was not the right representation of the Earth in order to understand where we are. So in fact, each performance has a very clear hypothesis. And the result, can I really summarize the result? It's difficult what you're asking me. I think the results are a series of it's and you know, it's interesting because you force me to answer the question I have asked at the introduction, and I should have answered my own question, which was, what is the specificity of the knowledge created on stage? And I think you tell me, but I think it's not exactly the same nature, the same epistemic knowledge than yours, of course. So I won't be able to tell you, look, the result, I can put it in a science article. However, some of the researches we've been doing about how to represent the Earth or Gaia differently than with the current scientific and cartographic images, that has been published in not Nature or Science, but in good, you know, journals that could count as answers. Terraforma maybe is a good answer to what is really the result. But you see, I'm not very clear. I'm hesitating. I think it's a difficult question, and I should work on that line if I want to keep my metaphor of experiment.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Taylor. And Father Francis?
Yes, in a way, my observation and question is coming a little bit close to what was just said. Some of Bruno Latour's early writing, very famous, is about kind of the study of the emic community of a scientific laboratory, right? The internal community of discourse that shapes both experimentation and its outcomes. Okay, so by using theater in a way, you can continue to create a community of discourse, right? But without some of the constraints about outcomes, and you just outlined how that actually worked. Now, when we for example, when Annika and I did that improvisational drama a couple of summers ago at the Esri, you know, at the summer seminar, everyone was given a little slip of paper, and there were several different slips of paper with different quotations on it. The quotations didn't come from the whole world, but came from a specific corner, you might say, of the world to illustrate the world as a whole in a small way. Right? They were the story of, you might say, diachronical statements of the life of a family. And people were supposed to improvise in a great circle, 2 circles, as a matter of fact, improvise to one another those statements. Now, putting together what you were saying about the theater of the world and putting together the improvisational drama that Annika and I produced, I was thinking about something else, and that is not just Gaia, but Sophia. And if you know that, of course, in Saint Athanasius, there is the idea that Sophia is created and uncreated, and the created Sophia is the mirror of the uncreated Sophia. Now, and of course, the uncreated Sophia is the Logos, is the source for all created things. But in the Gnostic myth of Sophia, as in, for example, a text from Nag Hammadi, like the hypostasis of the archons, you have a dark myth about Sophia, right? And violence and abuse and misunderstanding and really a battle of the virtues and vices, out of which comes the liberation of the soul. So there is a drama there. And there is a drama there in a Sophia who is indeed feisty, troubled, mistreated, and in every way represents both the earth and those of us who are sensitive to our relationship to the earth. I'm just really excited about the possibility that maybe the next step is to look at that myth, you know, in the light of the experiment that your ongoing experiment, because in fact, it does help us understand the diffusive and chimeric quality of Gaia Sophia. And I want to really appreciate that with what you're trying to do. Thanks.
Thank you very much indeed. Would you be kind enough to send me that myth and references, which I don't really know? So thank you for this very, very deep remark. But then maybe you might have the answer to my recurring personal question. This intuition I mentioned at the beginning of my talk, that there is a very strong link between theater and earth. It's the same letters, by the way. That and maybe this strong link is that there is a drama, as you said, there is a drama there originally, agon, you know, this kind of. So I would be very, very happy to inquire more into that idea. Thank you.
Yeah, very good.
Thank you for that great question. I think we are almost at our time, but we have maybe time for one more question. If anyone has a question on their mind or heart, feel free to come forward. And if there are no questions, I would maybe have one final question for you, Frédérique, if I may. Near the end, you made a really quick mention of Gaia as a topos, and I'm just curious, you sort of went on quite quickly after that. I'm wondering if you could maybe expand on this idea of sort of the inherent paradox of Gaia being her atopical nature being what makes her this actress, and yet there's this tension where there's the atopos, which is sort of everywhere and nowhere at one time, and yet there's this also the urgency of the local or the localizable, what we can locate as in loci, and that as being something which also draws, you know, people into the specificity of story, of politics, of content, of something which is very specific. So I'm just wondering how if you've thought about that sort of tension in the sense of you're playing with something so atopos, as you said, and yet what does that also do just in terms of the power that loci or the local can also have in terms of narrative and theatrical representation?
Wow, this is the last question, which could open up another 2 hours of discussion, but it's a beautiful one. I think it's one of the key questions at the moment, not only of theater, but of philosophy, isn't it? The very nature of space, and the fact that all the old, I would say, traditional philosophical helps we might have, all the definitions of space that we inherit are how can I say that, disrupted by the emergence of Gaia. And of course, this tension is especially visible in theater, because one could say that theater is the art of space. Some people would say it's the art of time, but I like to think of theater as the art of space. At least that's the way I approach it, with a very scenographical, architectural take on it. So you're absolutely right. It's a paradox, and the reason why I mentioned that so quickly at the end, it's actually there is a footnote, and the footnote I could send the reference, if you like, is one of the very recent Isabelle Stenger's article in Bruno's last catalogue, you know, the catalogue of the beautiful Critical Zone exhibition. You have a few articles by Isabelle in it, and one of them is, out of my mind, the title is something like, "Why can't you situate Gaia? Gaia est insituable." And Isabelle develops very beautifully this idea of an atopic Gaia. And of course, one could say that this is not something that will stop theater because it's interesting to play with a topic character and to ask ourselves how can we make room for a topic character in a place which is a topos, which is but Foucault said that it's a heterotopy. Theater is interesting because it's not any topos. It's a place where you can play with the very idea of space, I think. So again, I'm trying to save theater, even with your beautiful question that could discard theater as a irrelevant medium. But I think heterotopic theater is a good way to approach atopic Gaia.
Wow, that's beautiful. It gives us definitely more food for thought. Thank you. And so with that, I think we're right at our time. So thank you so much, Frédérique, once again, from all of us for this incredibly rich and richly woven talk. And we certainly look forward to following more of your work in the future, and we hope you'll be back in some fashion at Mind and Life Europe. And with that, thanks everyone for joining this evening, and for those who are watching in the future, thank you as well. And I think with that, we have a couple of announcements for upcoming programs, if I'm not mistaken. So for those who'd like to join us for our next online talk, we'll have an MLE Friends webinar, which is actually quite related to some of what we've been talking about this evening, by the philosopher Laura Conziotto on November 14th. And the name of her talk is actually Loving a Place That Is Dying. So talking very much about the specificity of place, ironically enough, and environmental love, grief, and hope. And so she'll be giving a talk for MLE Friends subscribers. If you'd like to join that community, you can do that on our website. And we'll have our next contemplation practice session on the 12th of November. And also for any young researchers who are looking to get some support for their research projects, if they're working within the enactive framework or the neurophenomenological framework, the European Varela Award application cycle is open now, and it's open until the 1st of December. So we just wanted to make sure everyone's aware of that. And so we hope to see many of you back very soon in the Zoom room. And thank you again for joining this evening. And thanks again, Frédérique. Have a nice...
All of you. Thank you so much.
Bye. Thank you.